March 15, 1944. Japanese Naval Intelligence Headquarters, Tokyo. Commander Atsuzo Kurihara stared at transcriptions of yet another intercepted American Marine Corps transmission, his third cup of cold tea sitting forgotten on the desk beside him. For 18 hours, his team of Japan's finest cryptanalytic specialists had been attempting to decode what appeared to be tactical communications from marine operations in the Central Pacific. The patterns defied every analytical technique in their arsenal. The sounds were not random. The timing suggested structured military communication, preceding American attacks with apparent operational significance. The transmission duration was consistent with tactical orders. The frequency usage matched documented Marine Corps protocols. Yet the language itself remained absolutely impenetrable, unlike anything in their extensive files on Allied communication systems. No known military code, no recognizable language pattern, nothing that yielded to conventional analysis. Kurihara commanded one of the world's most sophisticated signals intelligence operations. The facility near Tokyo employed approximately 500 personnel, operating 118 radio receivers and directional finding equipment. His cryptanalytic teams had successfully broken American diplomatic traffic. They had penetrated British naval communications. They had solved multiple Army codes. They had decrypted State Department messages before Pearl Harbor, providing Japan with crucial intelligence throughout the early war years. Yet these marine transmissions represented complete cryptographic failure. 3 years into the war, after breaking dozens of Allied codes, Japan's best analytical minds could not decipher even basic patterns in these mysterious communications. The problem was not incompetence. The problem was something Kurihara could not possibly understand. He was listening to the only unbroken military code in modern history. The story of how this unbreakable code came into being begins not in the Pacific Theater, but in the American Southwest, where for centuries the Navajo people had preserved a language fundamentally unlike any other on Earth. The Navajo language, called Diné Bizad by its speakers, belongs to the Athapascan language family, with approximately 170,000 speakers in 1940. These speakers were confined almost entirely to a reservation spanning approximately 27,000 square miles across Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, land held by the Navajo people for centuries and reaffirmed through treaties with the United States government. The linguistic characteristics that would ultimately confound the world's most skilled Japanese cryptanalysts had evolved over millennia of isolated development. Navajo is fundamentally verb-centered, with actions described through complex prefix and suffix combinations that could theoretically create millions of distinct forms. The language employs 4 distinct tones: high, low, rising, and falling, where each tone completely alters word meaning. A slight mispronunciation did not just change a word. It could render an entire sentence incomprehensible to a native speaker. The phonology includes sounds absent from Japanese, English, and most world languages. Ejective stops, where air explodes using the glottis. A voiceless lateral fricative that sounds like wind through clenched teeth. Glottalized sonorants, nasalized vowels. For Japanese speakers trained in a language with just 5 basic vowel sounds and a phonemic system dramatically different from Navajo, accurately hearing and reproducing these phonemes was virtually impossible. The acoustic patterns were so foreign that recorded Navajo transmissions sounded to Japanese listeners like structured noise rather than human language. Philip Johnston understood the military potential of this linguistic fortress. Born in 1892 to a Protestant missionary serving on the Navajo reservation, Johnston grew up speaking Navajo fluently alongside English. He was one of fewer than 30 non-Navajos in the world who possessed genuine fluency in the language. By age 9, he was translating his father's sermons for Navajo audiences. By age 15, he had traveled to Washington, D.C. to translate for Navajo leaders meeting with government officials, including President Theodore Roosevelt. In December 1941, As America reeled from the attack on Pearl Harbor, Johnston read about Army Signal Corps units conducting experiments with Comanche speakers at Fort Sill in Louisiana. The Choctaw people had served as code talkers during World War I, but those efforts were improvised and limited in scope. Johnston envisioned something revolutionary, a formal military code based entirely on the Navajo language that would be both cryptographically unbreakable and practically deployable for modern warfare communications. On February 28, 1942, Johnston presented his proposal to Major General Clayton Vogel at Camp Elliott near San Diego. The demonstration was designed to be compelling. 4 Navajo speakers recruited from Los Angeles transmitted military messages, while Marine officers timed them against standard procedures. The Navajo speakers completed transmission of the same information in 20 seconds, compared to 30 minutes required for the M209 cipher machine, the standard military encryption device. General Vogel authorized a pilot program immediately. On May 4, 1942, 29 Navajo men were sworn in at Fort Wingate, New Mexico. These men came from across the reservation, some having attended boarding schools where speaking Navajo was forbidden and severely punished, others traditional sheep herders who rarely left their ancestral lands. The recruits included Chester Nez, Carl Gorman, Lloyd Oliver, John Benally, and others whose names would eventually be recognized in military history, though not during their lifetimes. At Camp Elliott, these men were isolated in a locked, guarded building for 8 weeks. Their assignment was monumental: develop comprehensive military terminology for concepts that did not exist in traditional Navajo, create an alphabet system that utilized the language's phonetic qualities, ensure perfect memorability, and design the system for expandability as new military technologies and concepts emerged. They built the code through cultural and linguistic logic. A submarine became beshlo, meaning iron fish swimming beneath the surface. A battleship was low whale, described as the ocean's largest creature. Fighter planes became da, meaning hummingbirds darting through air. Bombers were joshaw, representing buzzards circling before descending on prey. Each metaphor drew from natural observation and cultural knowledge, creating associations that would be instantly recognizable to any Navajo speaker, while remaining completely obscure to anyone outside Navajo culture. The alphabet system required special creativity. Each letter needed multiple Navajo word options to prevent frequency analysis, the fundamental weakness in most codes where certain letters appear with predictable regularity. The letter E, most common in English, received 4 different Navajo equivalents. The letter Z received several options. Code talkers would randomly alternate between available options for each letter, completely destroying the frequency patterns that cryptanalysts typically exploited. They developed 201 initial terms covering the essential military vocabulary required for Marine Corps tactical operations. Everything was memorized with perfect accuracy. No written code books could be maintained, as their capture would compromise the entire system. Chester Nez later recalled, "We drilled endlessly. A mistake could cost lives. In our culture, words have power. Speaking correctly was sacred. This was different. We were using our language as a weapon." The code's first operational test came at Guadalcanal in August 1942. 15 code talkers landed with the 1st Marine Division during the American invasion. The Japanese had expected the invasion, having decoded other Allied communications through their earlier cryptanalytic successes. But suddenly, Marine tactical messages became completely incomprehensible. At Japanese 8th Fleet headquarters in Rabaul, intelligence officers scrambled to understand these transmissions. Lieutenant Kazuo Yamada, educated at Stanford University before the war, reported to his commanders, "The sounds are structured like language with consistent patterns, but they match nothing. Not English, French, Dutch, Spanish, any Philippine dialect, any Chinese dialect we know. Completely foreign, utterly alien." The Japanese response to this cryptographic mystery was systematic and ultimately futile. They assigned top cryptanalytic personnel. They recorded hundreds of hours of transmissions on wax cylinders. They applied every analytical technique in their arsenal. They consulted university linguists and scholars. Some desperation even led to consultation with Buddhist monks who studied ancient languages, hoping someone might recognize patterns or linguistic characteristics. Nothing worked. On November 8, 1942, code talker Chester Nez transmitted artillery coordinates that targeted a Japanese machine gun position. The transmission lasted 14 seconds, information that would have required several minutes to encrypt and transmit using conventional methods. The transmission was intercepted by Japanese intelligence, but remained meaningless noise to the operators. Within minutes, American artillery shells fell with devastating accuracy on the target. The machine gun nest was destroyed. Colonel Haruo Konuma, intelligence officer for the Japanese 17th Army, wrote a report that reflected growing alarm. The Americans have deployed a code that defeats every analytical attempt. We can no longer anticipate attacks. We are fighting blind. The report was accurate. For the first time in the war, Japanese intelligence could not read American tactical communications. Every battle would now be a surprise. Every American maneuver would be unexpected. Japan's response to the Unbreakable code was multifaceted and desperate, reflecting the significance of what they faced. The Imperial Navy's 4th Section assigned 30 cryptanalytic specialists exclusively to attempting to decode the mysterious marine transmissions. These were among Japan's best analytical minds. Captain Yoshiro Tanaka, leading the effort, tried innovative approaches that reflected sophisticated understanding of cryptanalysis. Tanaka's team conducted musical analysis, searching for tonal patterns that might reveal structure. They compared the recordings to known Native American tribal music, hoping to identify which indigenous language they were hearing. They consulted with scholars who had studied in America, attempting to narrow down possibilities. They developed special recording equipment capable of slowing transmissions without distorting the acoustic qualities that might provide clues. They created visual sound representations using oscilloscopes, attempting to find patterns in the frequency characteristics that might yield to analysis. What they discovered was frustrating. They identified certain probable call signs through pattern recognition. They noticed correlation between message length and operational complexity. They observed that longer transmissions preceded larger military operations. But without understanding the actual words being spoken, these observations provided minimal tactical value. A message could be identified as important without the content being understood. The intelligence officers knew something significant was being transmitted. They simply could not determine what. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence had made a crucial discovery. The mysterious code was based on a Native American language. This breakthrough was simultaneously valuable and ultimately useless. Knowing the language was Native American did not solve the problem. North America contained numerous indigenous languages, many with very limited documentation. Native American languages were not well studied in Japanese academia. Finding specialists who might recognize specific languages was difficult. Even if they identified the correct language, Japanese intelligence officers realized they would still face the fundamental barrier, a language they did not understand and could not readily learn. A crucial moment came when Japanese forces captured an American serviceman who was a fluent Navajo speaker. Joe Kiowa, a Navajo soldier captured at Bataan in April 1942, became Japan's best hope for breaking the code. Though fluent in Navajo, Kiowa had no knowledge of the military code being developed. He had been captured before the Code Talker program began. When Japanese intelligence began intercepting Navajo transmissions in 1942, they brought Kiowa to interrogation centers. Japanese intelligence officers played him recordings of Code Talker transmissions and demanded translation. Kiowa heard Navajo words, but in combinations that made no sense. The turtle is attacking the ironfish. The hummingbird carries eggs. The meanings were incomprehensible because they were military metaphors rather than literal Navajo statements. When he could not translate, Japanese interrogators accused him of lying, of deliberately withholding information. The interrogation became increasingly brutal. The torture escalated systematically over months. Water torture, beatings, hanging by the arms for hours. In winter 1943, Japanese guards forced him to stand naked in the snow until his feet froze to the ground. They starved him, offering food in exchange for translations that would solve the code. Through everything, Kiowa could only repeat the truth. He understood the Navajo words, but not their military meanings. A Japanese intelligence report from May 1943 documented their frustration and growing understanding. The prisoner appears native to the mystery language but cannot comprehend messages. Assessment: either extraordinary resistance or enemy uses specialized code within native language requiring specific training. The second assessment was correct. Kiowa's inability to help convinced Japanese intelligence that they faced something unprecedented. The Americans had taken a native language that Japanese officers could not learn and created a specialized military vocabulary within that language. Even a fluent Navajo speaker could not understand the messages without the specific training that American military instructors provided. Kiowa survived 3.5 years of captivity. His persistence in telling the truth, that he could not help break the code, ultimately convinced Japanese intelligence that brute force interrogation would not solve their cryptographic problem. The code remained unbroken because it required not just understanding Navajo language, but understanding the specific military vocabulary that American instructors had created for the code talkers. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence largely abandoned their active attempts to decode Navajo transmissions. They would continue monitoring and recording transmissions, but the systematic cryptanalytic assault effectively ceased. The recognition that they faced an unbreakable code was painful to admit, but Japanese intelligence officers were professional enough to acknowledge failure and redirect resources. Success at Guadalcanal led to immediate expansion of the Code Talker program. Major General Alexander Vandergrift, commanding the 1st Marine Division, wrote, "The Navajo communicators have proven invaluable. Their transmissions are faster than any encoding device and absolutely secure. Request immediate expansion of program to all divisions." A formal Code Talker training school was established at Camp Pendleton, California, processing new classes of recruits every 8 weeks. The training was unlike anything in Marine Corps history. Recruits practiced in soundproof booths, while instructors introduced battlefield noises, simulated gunfire, explosions, aircraft overhead. They transmitted while wearing gas masks, while running to exhaustion, while subjected to simulated combat stress. The objective was absolute accuracy under the worst possible conditions. Thomas Bay, who enlisted at age 15, described the training. "They pushed us beyond what seemed possible, but they were right. Lives depended on our accuracy. You couldn't afford mistakes." The code evolved continuously as new military technologies and concepts emerged during the war. The atomic bomb, initially unknown to anyone at the time, eventually became Ayashi, or metal egg. Kamikaze pilots were designated Neti, meaning death wind. Each addition to the code was developed through the same logical, metaphorical process. The additions were immediately comprehensible to Navajo speakers, but utterly incomprehensible to everyone outside Navajo culture and the Code Talker training program. The linguistic characteristics that made the code unbreakable were fundamental to Navajo language structure. The 4 tones meant that slight variations in pronunciation completely changed meaning. Japanese intelligence officers, trained in a tonal language system, might have expected to learn to hear the distinctions. But Navajo tones functioned differently than Japanese pitch accents, and the phonemic inventory was so different that even specialists struggled. Additionally, Navajo's verb-centered grammar and complex morphological system meant that even if someone learned to pronounce individual words correctly, understanding sentence-level meaning required deep immersion in the language and culture. By mid-1943, Japanese military leadership understood the scope of the problem. The Imperial Navy's 4th Section submitted an official assessment. The American Marine Corps has deployed a code utilizing an indigenous North American language. Despite assigning our best cryptanalytic specialists, we cannot break this code. The language is too unfamiliar. The vocabulary includes military terms that do not exist in any known dictionary. This code is likely impenetrable for the remainder of the war. The assessment was accurate. Japanese intelligence would never break the Navajo Code. They would monitor transmissions. They would record hundreds of hours of communications. They would try different approaches, but success would elude them completely. By war's end, between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines had served as code talkers across all 6 Marine divisions. They transmitted tens of thousands of messages under combat conditions without a single error that compromised security. They served in every major Pacific campaign: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. At Iwo Jima, 6 code talkers working in relay teams maintained continuous communication throughout the initial assault. In the first 48 hours alone, they transmitted and received over 800 messages without error while under constant fire. Major Howard Connor, who coordinated operations, later testified, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. I had 6 Navajo radio nets operating around the clock. They sent and received over 800 messages without error. The entire operation was directed by Navajo Code." During the Okinawa campaign, the largest Pacific assault of the war, 35 code talkers coordinated communications for 183,000 troops over 82 days of brutal combat. Japanese forces, aware they were facing an unbreakable code, attempted jamming and voice mimicry, but could not reproduce Navajo's tonal qualities. Lieutenant Hiroshi Miyamoto's attempts to mimic Navajo sounded, according to code talker Alfred Newman, like someone gargling while trying to talk. On August 14, 1945, code talker Teddy Draper transmitted the war's most historically significant message in Navajo: "Nehema Adijini Adanil," Japanese surrender. The message went through the Navajo Code network before official conventional channels received confirmation, a fitting symbolic end to the code talkers' war. After the war, American intelligence officers interrogating Japanese military personnel discovered the full extent of Japanese intelligence efforts and their complete failure. Lieutenant General Seizo Arisue, Japan's chief of intelligence, admitted, "We never broke the Marine Code. We broke Army codes, Air Force codes, diplomatic traffic, but the Marine Tactical Code was completely secure." Captain Yasuji Kawamoto was more specific. "We recorded thousands of transmissions. Our best linguists studied them for 3 years. We tried everything. Nothing worked. It was our greatest cryptanalytic failure." Colonel Masao Yamada acknowledged the operational impact. Inability to read Marine communications cost thousands of lives. Every Marine operation after 1942 was a mystery until it began. Major Hiroshi Tanaka, who survived the Iwo Jima assault, described the psychological impact. "We couldn't understand their words. It made us feel primitive, defeated before battle began. We were fighting an invisible enemy that spoke in a language we could not penetrate." In 1944, Japanese intelligence analysts noted tonal patterns in recordings and theorized indigenous American languages. They requested German assistance, hoping German expertise in linguistics might help. But wartime difficulties prevented meaningful collaboration, and German scholars had no expertise with Native American languages. The German assistance never materialized. Japanese strategic assessments, written in 1944-1945, increasingly reflected the understanding that they were losing tactical advantage because they could not read Marine communications. One intelligence report noted, "The Americans possess a cryptographic advantage we cannot overcome. Our inability to intercept marine tactical communications provides them with strategic freedom we cannot match. This represents a major contribution to American operational success. The war's end did not bring immediate recognition or freedom for the Code Talkers. The program remained classified for potential Cold War use. Code Talkers returned home unable to discuss their military service with anyone. Not family, not friends, not future employers. They were bound by military secrecy that would not be lifted for nearly 2 decades. The burden of silence was heavy. Many had served in combat, transmitted under fire, saved lives through their linguistic skills, yet could not speak of their contributions. Chester Nays, one of the original 29, later wrote, "We were warriors who helped win the war, but couldn't tell anyone." The burden was heavy. Many found healing through traditional ceremonies. The return to civilian life was complicated by the legal and social reality of being Native American in post-war America. Code Talkers returned to states that denied them voting rights. New Mexico and Arizona did not grant Native Americans voting rights until 1948. Utah withheld voting rights until 1957. Hotels and restaurants in many communities refused them service. The heroes who had served their country in the most critical military intelligence program of the war came home to a nation that treated them as second-class citizens. Many Code Talkers turned to traditional Navajo ceremonies for healing. The Enemy Way ceremony, a traditional Navajo healing ritual, was used to purify warriors from the spiritual contamination of warfare. The ceremony acknowledged that they had used their sacred language, a language traditionally used for prayers, ceremonies, and cultural transmission, as an instrument of war. Danuski explained, "We had used our language to direct death. We needed it for healing. The ceremonies reminded us our language was sacred. It still is." The program remained classified until 1968, when the military finally declassified the Navajo Code Talker program. The delay meant that for nearly a quarter century, the Code Talkers' contributions could not be publicly acknowledged. By the time classification was lifted, many of the original Code Talkers had already passed away. The first public recognition came in 1969 at a 4th Marine Division reunion, where Code Talkers were finally permitted to discuss their service openly. President Ronald Reagan declared August 14, 1982 as National Navajo Code Talkers Day, honoring the Code Talkers' contributions and the day the surrender message had been transmitted. The most significant formal recognition came on July 26, 2001, when President George W. Bush presented congressional gold medals to the original 29 Code Talkers in the United States Capitol Rotunda. Only 5 of the original 29 survived to attend the ceremony. The presentation acknowledged, nearly 60 years after the code was created, that the nation recognized their service as extraordinary and essential to American victory. President Bush declared, "Today we honor 29 Native Americans who gave their country a service only they could give." The Navajo Code Talkers demonstrated that diversity strengthens our nation. Their language, their culture, their dedication showed that America's greatest strength comes from the many peoples and traditions that comprise our nation. Chester Nez, attending the ceremony at age 85, responded, "We were ordinary men given an extraordinary task. We used our sacred language to help win the war. We did our duty as soldiers and as Navajo people. We are proud to finally be recognized." While the Navajo Code Talkers are most famous, the Code Talker concept extended to other indigenous nations. The Comanche Code Talkers, pioneered during World War I, returned in World War II with 17 Comanche speakers serving in Europe. They participated in D-Day operations and subsequent campaigns. Hopi, Cherokee, Lakota, Choctaw, and members of other tribal nations provided Code Talkers in various military branches. The 2008 Code Talkers Recognition Act acknowledged all tribes and all Code Talkers who served. John Brown Jr., a Comanche Code Talker, observed, "They told us our language was no good. Then they needed it to win the war. That contradiction taught us something profound about American attitude toward indigenous peoples. The Navajo Code Talkers demonstrated the linguistic sophistication of Native American languages. Code Talkers in real time modernized Navajo, creating grammatical constructions and adapting metaphors for military purposes. The agglutinative nature of Navajo allowed complex ideas to be expressed in single words. Concepts that required paragraphs in English could become brief Navajo phrases. Dr. William Morgan, a linguist who studied the code, noted, "The Code Talkers proved indigenous languages aren't primitive. They showed Navajo could express anything from ceremonies to modern warfare. They demonstrated that Native American languages possess complexity and flexibility that equals or exceeds any language on Earth." The Navajo Code introduced the concept of cultural encryption, security achieved through linguistic barriers that no amount of mathematical analysis could overcome. This concept influenced post-war intelligence operations and remains relevant today. As quantum computing threatens conventional mathematical encryption, the principle that human linguistic and cultural complexity can exceed mechanistic cryptographic approaches has gained new significance. Colonel David Hatch, chief historian of the National Security Agency, evaluated the code's place in intelligence history. They achieved something unique, a code never broken, never compromised, never even partially solved. It proved that human linguistic capability could exceed mechanical encryption. In an age of quantum computing, this principle has renewed relevance. In the 1980s and 1990s, Japanese scholarship examined their intelligence failure. Professor Teo Yoshikawa revealed that Japanese intelligence had assigned 30 cryptanalytic specialists to breaking the code. They had recorded thousands of transmissions. They had consulted multiple universities. Captain Minoru Yamada revealed, "We knew it was Native American by late 1943, but couldn't identify which language. We had specialists who knew Native American languages existed, but detailed knowledge was minimal." Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Fukumoto admitted with professional candor, "Using a native language was so simple, so elegant, we never considered it. We were prepared for every type of code, mathematical, substitution, transposition. We prepared for mechanical ciphers. We never expected them to use a language that was simply incomprehensible to us." In the 1990s, Japanese photographer Kenji Kawano documented surviving code talkers and their stories. His exhibitions in Tokyo and Hiroshima introduced Japanese audiences to the complete history. Code talker Albert Smith told Japanese audiences, "We were both warriors. My language helped defeat you in war, but now helps us understand each other in peace." The Japanese Association of Intelligence Studies held a symposium in 2010 featuring Admiral Hiroaki Arbe, who had studied post-war intelligence records. His presentation acknowledged, "The Navajo Code represents perfect encryption. We had Asia's best code breakers yet were completely defeated. This represents a lesson about the limits of conventional analysis when facing truly alien systems." Chester Nez, the last surviving member of the original 29 Code Talkers, died on June 4, 2014, at age 93. His death marked the end of an era. Today, only 2 or 3 Code Talkers from the approximately 400 who served remain alive, all in advanced age. Thomas H. Bay and Peter MacDonald, both in their 90s, continue to speak at educational events and military ceremonies, sharing the Code Talker story with younger generations. Peter MacDonald, speaking at age 96, stated, "We showed America's strength comes from diversity. Our different languages and cultures make us stronger." That message was true in 1942. It remains true today. The Navajo language, once suppressed by American government boarding school policies that punished children for speaking their native tongue, is now recognized as strategically important. Federal education funding references the Code Talker story as an example of preserving indigenous languages. Young Native Americans study ancestral languages with renewed pride, understanding that their languages carry value beyond cultural preservation. They carry strategic significance. Dr. Jennifer Dennett-Dale, a Navajo scholar and historian, observed, "Code Talkers fundamentally transformed how Native Americans see themselves and how America sees Native Americans. They proved our languages aren't museum pieces or relics of the past, but living resources with contemporary value." The Code Talkers demonstrated that indigenous knowledge and indigenous ways of being can serve modern purposes. The deeper significance of the Navajo Code Talkers extends far beyond cryptography or military history. The Code Talkers represented something that Japanese ideology could not accommodate. Japan's racial theories predicted the superiority of technologically advanced, industrially powerful nations. The idea that a marginalized indigenous people, whose language their own government had tried to eradicate, would possess the strategic capability to defeat the cryptographic efforts of an advanced industrial nation, contradicted everything Japan's imperial ideology proclaimed. The Code Talkers embodied an America that Japan's ideology could not understand. They proved that America's greatest strength was not industrial capacity or technological sophistication, but human diversity. Linguistic variety became strategic advantage. Cultural difference became military strength. The Navajo language that boarding schools tried to eliminate became key to Pacific victory. When Japanese intelligence officers finally understood what they faced, they were forced to acknowledge something that their strategic theories had not prepared them for. Lieutenant General Arisue's admission that Japan never cracked the code used by the Marines represents more than tactical defeat. It represents the moment when an empire based on racial ideology confronted the reality that its assumptions about human capability and national strength were fundamentally wrong. Today, as the last Code Talkers pass into history, their legacy endures in multiple dimensions. The language once forbidden is taught in schools with pride. Native American veterans are recognized as serving at the highest per capita rates of any demographic group. The principle that diversity strengthens security is now accepted military doctrine. The concept that linguistic and cultural complexity can provide advantages that mathematical encryption cannot is recognized in intelligence studies. The Code Talkers sent messages across the Pacific that Japan never decoded. Messages that directed artillery fire, coordinated amphibious assaults, transmitted strategic orders, and ultimately contributed to American victory. But their greatest message transcended warfare itself. Diversity brings strength. Culture brings power. Indigenous knowledge serves modern purposes. Young Navajo men using their sacred language as a weapon, then as an instrument of healing and peace, proved forever that America's greatest encryption is diversity itself. Unbreakable because it emerges from the limitless complexity of human experience and the infinite wisdom of many cultures united in purpose, yet strengthened by their differences. The unbroken code remains unbroken, living in every Native American child speaking ancestral language with pride. Every recognition that minority contributions strengthen national identity. Every understanding that differences make us stronger together. The Code Talkers proved that our differences are strengths to celebrate. Eternal proof that many voices, peoples, and languages, united yet diverse, create the unbreakable code of freedom itself.